Thank you all for being here today. It's such a delight to be in conversation with you,
Absolutely.
Sonya. And I think you want to begin by showing us a video.
Yeah, the idea was for today that I will show you an 8-minute video that I made 1.5 years ago. And we will speak more about it after that.
So Sonya, can you say some more about how this work came to be?
Yes, absolutely. This work happened because these two archaeologists that I also mentioned with my things, they approached me and told me about their archaeological finds that they had made on Tempelhofer Feld. Tempelhofer Feld in Berlin, for those who don't know what that is an airfield. It was an airport for passengers for a while, but in around 41, it completely stopped being a passengers airport and turned into a military airport. Deutsche Lufthansa and Weser Flugzeugbau GmbH were responsible for the ammunition of airplanes. So the so-called Stuka Sturzkampfbomber were created on this airfield. And because of that, and because of the big changes that had already happened since the beginning of the war, a lot of forced laborers had to come to the Tempelhofer Feld to work in this industry, in this defense industry that had started. So the two companies that I mentioned, they had to start building housing for the people to house them. So basically a place to be, and they had prefabricated barracks that they would put up on Tempelhofer Feld. Housed people from mainly the Soviet Union, but also from the Netherlands or France, mainly men, but a few women also. And that started in, let's say, 41 and went on till the end of the war, and these barracks all disappeared. When in around 2012, there were plans to build on Tempelhofer Airfield because it's an airport that had stopped being an active airport and became like one of the biggest inner city leisure areas that I think a European city has. There was a lot of discussions about starting to build housing on this, and as soon as there are plans of a building site or whatsoever, you have to bring in archaeologists to see if there is something of value in the ground or in the soil. And these archaeologists from the Freie Universität, Free University in Berlin, were asked to do the excavation. And they did it in the area where they knew that the barracks had been. I mean, we have to understand that the airport has a very layered history. It's not only the history of the forced labor, obviously, because after the war it became part of the American Allied zone. So the Americans would use that airport until 89 or 90. But the archaeologists were in particular very interested on the history during the Second World War. So they started an excavation, and they found up to 100,000 objects in maybe 3 or 4 areas, let's say 2 to 5 meters. And they approached me and asked me if I wanted to have a look at them, at the finds of this dig, if I want to work with them artistically. And when I went there, it was pretty overwhelming, as you can imagine. I mean, 100,000 objects is a lot, and even I only saw like a small part of them. Mm-hmm. But I immediately was very drawn to the nails that we see here also. The nails for me are interesting because they are mass fabricated object. Everyone knows them. Everyone knows how to handle them. They have a head and they can be used in a particular way. But these nails, they had already a life, you know, they had a history. They were in the earth for like 80 years or 75 years or something like that. Now they came up to the surface again. They changed their appearance, definitely. And then I asked them if I could have a part of that nails. The nails that they found were 14,000, around 14,000. And I could borrow 7,000, and I had them in my studio, and that's the situation that we see in the film. because I started to photograph them and try to engage with them and see what I can do with this archive that I basically had already. I think I photographed around 3,000 of the 7,000, but I felt I really want to do a film. I wanted to document the way how I handle the archive, also in this kind of helpless way, or I don't know how you saw that, but it's really the trial of like coming closer to these objects. That's also the title of the film. It's Approach or Annäherung in German, because it's me trying to get closer to the objects.
Mm-hmm. And you've done other work with the nails as well. Would you care to show us some of the images of the other work with the nails? Because I think it's an interesting contrast.
Yes. So after I did the film, the museum in Tempelhof Schöneberg, which is an area in Berlin, approached me and asked if I would like to do an installation with the topic of forced laborment in general. And they had seen the film and knew that I had worked with these nails. And one part of this museum is the building that we see here, which is the Schwerbelastungskörper in German, or there's no proper English translation because it only exists once on this planet. But they translated with heavy load weighing body. It is a structure that is around 15,000 tons heavy. It was built by or planned by Albert Speer, who was the main architect for the planning of Germania. Germania was the city to be when the German Reich would be successful, would be the capital of the German Reich. And this is kind of the beginning of the whole planning. And it's also the, let's say, last or the first object that kind of really came into life. And this is only a test body, a test architecture, because it was trying to survey the soil. Berlin has a very sandy soil, and to see how much weight the soil of Berlin could take for the buildings that were planned for the future city of Germania. And the buildings were extremely megalomaniac, and so you had to create something like that to check out what would happen, you know. And this is also a building that was created with the help of forced laborers. It's out of concrete, but it has a room inside, a room in which the measurement instruments would be located, and you could also go into the ground 14 meters deep to measure more. And this building still exists because it's a building that you cannot get rid of. Obviously, it's something that you have to somehow embrace and handle and deal with. After the war, it was, and I think until the 80s, it belonged to the Technical University, and they continued doing measurements of the ground with it. And then it ended up in the hands of the museum, and it's now called an information space to go to. Not an honorary space, but an Informationsort, Schwerbelastungskörper. So there's one space inside and that you can enter, and I decided to make an installation with the now 14,000 nails because I was able to get all of the nails out of the archaeological finds, which was a kind of a big deal because usually you are not, like as a private person, not allowed to own things from an archaeological dig or to get them, but they were kind of happy and able to give it to me. So I made this like floor installation with the nails. The floor that you see here, the red one, is a wooden floor that was put in. It is not there usually. It's just a concrete floor, and the nails were put on top of it. And the exhibition was up for around 6 months. So this is a space where the audience can just go. It's the entrance is free. And the idea of this installation was that the visitors are walking on the nails and also influence the, or are part of the transformational process of these objects.
So there seems to be contrast in the film where we see the nails being sort of meticulously photographed and documented and placed inside plastic bags, inside acid-free boxes to be archived away, which in some cases we say we put things in archives so we can forget them. And here it's very interactive, and also then the viewer is part of the decay or the disintegration of the material.
Yeah. The idea was also to physically feel the objects, you know. So when you would walk on them, you have them under your soles. You cannot like forget about them. You also hear the cracking of the nails. It was a very interesting sound experience that you had inside, and that was for me very important. That the audience is invited or even maybe forced to. I mean, nobody was forced to step on them, obviously, but if you would do it, there is no way of not engaging with it and not understanding or taking some physical aspect from walking on them. And what you said before with the putting into the boxes and stuff, it was a very intense experience to handle this archive. A nail in a bag, you know, and it had to go back in the same order. So everything was super strict. As soon as they belonged to me, I was able to do whatever I wanted. And then I released them, which was a very weird moment too, because I know that a huge group of people had put so much effort into categorizing them and cataloging them and putting them in these boxes and stuff. And now you take it all out. And it was also, in a way, a physical moment because, as you can see, they are rust by now, you know. They are decaying. They are on their way, you know. And so, I mean, the studio was full of dust after I did that. But it was pretty great, actually.
So how did you release them?
Yeah, I just took one by one out of them. Out of the bags, and then I brought all of them to this space and put them on the floor.
So much of your work is about the interplay between people's personal stories, their own sort of micro narratives, and the larger historic narrative, what we might call history with a capital H, right? And so I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more, show us some more of the work that engages people's individual stories.
This is just an image from a theater play that I made in 2014 and 15, which was based of an archive that I started in 2009 with conversations that I had with people that experienced the Second World War. There was a time in my life when I understood that if I want to understand something about my own generation or the future, I really have to understand the past. And that past for me was, the generation of our grandparents or my grandparents. Because I also grew up with my grandparents. We all lived together, my parents and them, and they really fascinated me. I mean, because there was like all this big secrecy about their experiences, which is a very well-known fact in Germany that people for decades didn't speak about certain events that had taken place or the war per se. And I felt at that time that people were much more open, to speak. So much had happened. You have Steven Spielberg and all the films that happened in the meantime, the Shoah Foundation, and people started to really open up more about this. And I felt this is maybe a moment that would be good to speak to the last people that had experienced that time. And this is still an ongoing archive, but it's definitely getting I work much less on it. I'm meeting people because people are disappearing now. They can tell stories. And already back then, I met mostly people that had been children or young adults. So it was very difficult to meet someone who had been an active adult during that time. But I felt that these are the people that had influenced us. So it's very, very important to meet them. And coming back to this work, I chose like 10 conversations that I had with people. So the conversations mostly took place in Germany, but also in America and Israel. And I chose 10, I turned them into monologues, and I worked with 10 actors that were from my generation. And each of them learned one monologue. The play happened outdoors, so it happened on a so-called rubble hill. That's my translation. It's a Trümmerberg, which is a particular formation or hill that you can find in probably not only Germany, but in countries that have experienced severe damages in cities. So under these hills is the debris and the rubble of how Berlin would look like in 45, 46. These places always had like a big, inspiration for me in a way, and because you really walk on it. There are great parks now, recreational areas, but you really walk on this history, like physically. And so there were always, the shows happened on this hill, and there were always 10 people in the audience. You had to get a ticket beforehand, and then you would come there. You would get an introduction on where you were, what the rubble hill is, where the rubble comes from. And then each audience member would go on a walk with one actor for like 1 hour over the hill. The play happened in any weather. It was always in a walking situation, and each of the audience members would experience a different play because everyone heard a different story. And it was a very intimate situation that I kind of wanted to recreate from the situations that I had been in with the people when we had these conversations.
Can you say a little bit more about your research process? How do you decide which stories to tell or which events from the past to recall?
Now, which events is, the big event that interested me for many years, and I always hoped to let go, but it didn't happen yet, is the Second World War, or the whole period around that, because I understood that as the biggest breaking point in most of the biographies, not only German. You can spread that all over the world, and that is also something that is repeating on a daily basis, and it's something that I was born into. So that's where I felt I can speak about most, or let other people speak about it most to me, because I do understand somehow the situations of the culture, maybe. So that was, and definitely also the reason why I started this was living with these people and knowing them, grandparents' generation, being around them, seeing how they were severely wounded by that, or how they were still suffering from that time, even like 40, 50, 60 years later. And I just wanted to give this period a voice without saying, I never say, Germany is not the perpetrator of this war. That was not the case. I was just like trying to understand how people lived during that time. What did you do? How could you exist? And what were your decisions, or could you decide at all? So that was the questions that I had.
Yeah. So it's a very sensory experience, right? Both the case of walking on the nails and walking and hearing someone's story. So I'm wondering how you provide context, like enough historical context for participants to understand the context of the experience, but then also have their own experiences as well.
Yeah, that's always, you always have to do that in a different way, I guess. With the theater play, it was in a sense easier because we had like a person in particular who would always give the introduction to the play, and that was very helpful to, you know, get the setting right. Where are we? Why is it like that? And then also talk about the monologues that people were about to hear. But definitely already there, you have an invitation. You know, everything is already kind of, people come because they're interested in the topic. With the nails, yeah, I really made a proper booklet. I really wanted people to get all the background information because it's very, very important when you come to a place like the Schwerbelastungskörper to understand what that is, and then to see the connection with the nails, because it's fucking heavy. You know, everything is super heavy about that place and also about the nails. Yeah. And that's very difficult to frame in a way.
Yeah. Is there a danger in aestheticizing the experience?
I mean, the Schwerbelastungskörper in general has a danger. Yeah. You know, it's carrying a danger because definitely people are coming there who are fantasizing about how great that would have been, and you know, they are not permitted not to go there because it's a public place, so you can just approach it and I don't know, think whatever you want when you come there. The nails, yes, I had many sleepless nights thinking about how that would end up, and I'm not there to control this sensory experience. I'm not there every day, so I also really let go. Also, if people steal the objects or whatnot, you know, it's just up to the situation, I guess. So there is a lot of control that you have to give up, I think, when you work with this. Not sure if you have a similar experience, but I guess that is, I mean, you can frame things as much as you like, but you are not there till the end.
Yes, I mean, that's very similar to being an archivist. In one sense, archivists, we say we're in the context business, right? Because it's our job, our ethical obligation to provide as much context as possible for the interpretation of records. But at the end of the day, you cannot control how someone else makes meaning.
Makes meaning, reads something, sees something. I mean, definitely there were people walking on the nails that didn't even notice that there were nails on the floor, you know? So that also can happen. Yes.
So as an archivist, I am obsessed with this concept of record, right? A record of the past, which also seems to, I think, permeate a lot of your work. So I'm wondering if you could say more about the objects that you work with as records or archives of the past.
Yeah, I think to me, there was like this interesting connection when I did this work. This also happened together with Christoph. On the rubble hills, which was a collection of items that we would find on these hills. There are like 14 hills all over Berlin. And we would go on walks on those hills and really look for objects that were coming back to the surface. So we would never dig for them. They had to come up by themselves. That would happen, I don't know, through erosion or rainfall or whatever. And I guess when I did that, and parallel to that, doing the interviews with people that experienced that time, the importance of this physical archive and the audio archive or the memory archive, somehow it kind of clicked for me and it connected and it came together because, you know, the memory of a person is super fragmented and maybe also fabricated in a way, you know, because I'm not an investigative journalist, so you can tell me anything and I would not like prove you wrong or because it's your story, you know, so if you want to pass that on, that's fine with me. And the fragment is, or the shard is also yeah, it's only revealing one part of a narrative, but I believe that if we look closer, you can really understand much more about that time, you know, about or I mean, understand in the sense of course, like aesthetics, you know, who bought what or what kind of objects would you find, but also that is all destroyed. You know, it's all gone in a way.
Yeah. So your work, it works with records or archives, collections that are pre-existing, but then it also creates its own archive. So there's this really interesting process happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes. I mean, with the objects that you see here, definitely, it really became its own archive, and with the memory of the people, of course. The nails were an archive that were given to me, which I'm always extremely excited about if something comes up that I wouldn't look for, maybe in a sense, and it's already, and someone else has already decided that this is an archive. I find it very fascinating. Yeah. So that could be anything.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Does your audience interact emotionally, like with your pieces? Do they have an emotional experience of the past?
Yeah, I mean, in particular with the theater play, there was always a time after the walks when we would all come together and talk about it, and definitely there was a lot of emotion because people would come in particular because they had read that this is about this topic, so they were immediately talking about their own story or their parents' story or whatnot, you know. So it's immediately kind of like I guess an opening for maybe an inner conversation if you have no one else, which you don't always have. Yeah. If you go into the nail exhibition, you didn't have maybe someone else, which I think my work wants to create in a way that you have the possibility, but you're not forced to start this inner conversation with yourself or dig down in your own memory, and maybe it releases something, or maybe not. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Which I think relates to this larger question of like, what can art do? What role does art play in helping societies confront atrocities that they have been building on top of or sweeping under the rug?
Yeah, I guess since quite some years now, that's how I try to approach my art. And I know that even some people say this is not art, you know, or because it's not sellable or something like that, or it's such it has like another dimension. But I see it, I don't know, I was super happy when I found this way of working, because it helps me to understand a lot, but also I try to offer other people ways to understand something they might not have understood in a different way.
Right.
Yeah.
So were many of the audience members, was this new history to them?
You mean in the play?
In the play, the nails?
It depends on the generation, I would say. Yeah, like an older generation, of course not, you know, but some, to some, yes. I mean, there were even teenagers coming and stuff, so it was super interesting, and I guess also because the actors were not old, it didn't kind of like stick to the older generation, and it was more like, okay, this is something that tackles all generations. With the nails, I think it was something else, because the nails refer to the history of forced labor in Germany, and that is a topic that is not very well dealt with, and that quite some organizations are now open to work with and engage with. Also, like the museum, they were really like, hey, let's do something because it's very important. I think this year is even like the year of forced labor in Germany, so there are a lot of exhibitions opening and conversations about this. But we have 2022, and this is a very old topic, and a lot of people don't see the connections that forced labor has to us today. in Germany in particular. And that is, I guess that was something that with the nails exhibition was new to some people. A lot of information during the research that I made was very new to me. I know that there are so many straight and direct connections from companies back then that still exist today that never paid restitutions and I just checked, I mean, we have this like Stiftung, Erinnerung, Verantwortung and Zukunft, like memory, responsibility and future, which was founded, I think, in 2000. After there were really big discussions in the 90s of there has to be repatriation or reconciliation for these people. But by this time, it was really hard to bring that money back to, let's say, the Soviet Union and find the people. Hardly any records exist of their names or birthplaces, birth dates and stuff. And so German companies that were involved paid 10 million marks, which is now 5 million euros, which is a very small sum, I would say, for what happened or what kind of gain Germany had from all the forced labor that happened. And now we have like this Stiftung, this foundation, which is responsible on handling that money, but the foundation is obviously in Germany and handling the money that was put together for the people that worked in Germany. So in 2007, they stopped with the payment. So there is no payment going outwards of Germany anymore, but the foundation is still there in Germany and working with that money now. And we talked about that before. I find it very interesting that it always happens. You know,
Right.
The money that is meant for other people usually stays in a country and you make some projects, but then maybe you pay German people to work on these projects and never ends where it should go to.
Right. It goes back to the institution or government that so it doesn't do any of the repair work that it initially claimed to do.
Yeah.
So for me, your work really shows that the past is not in the past, right? That we're still living with this in the present. And for me, this image that we're seeing here is just such a good reminder that it will keep coming up to the surface, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Could you show us the image of the building in East Berlin?
This is the facade of a theater house, which is called Ballhaus Ost. It's on Pappelallee in Prenzlauer Berg. And when I moved to Berlin in '96, like all of the facades had in the eastern part had the scars of the last days or weeks of the war in Berlin, because during GDR these old buildings were not renovated. There was no financial aid for renovation, so basically the scars survived as a let's say walk-in museum until the 90s, until the reunification. And when I came, you saw so many of these, but like in the 90s, 2000s, everything was kind of wiped out. And on this facade of this theater house, they still exist because it's pretty run down, the building. So there were no renovations. I found this super fascinating, and I made this work where I added golded leaves to the holes to kind of highlight them. But it's not glued in, it's just like attached very, very carefully. And over the course of time, like wind and weather and whatnot, the gold would like disappear and like disperse into the city.
Mm-hmm. Similar to the dust from the nails.
Yeah. So the works are mostly like ephemeral, like they're for a certain period of time, and you can see them or not, but you can notice them or not.
And play with our concept of time. Like when I see these, I feel like I'm time traveling back and forth.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sonya. I hope we can continue this conversation informally in the lobby.
Thank you.
you.